Alright, good morning, people of YouTube. So we are back again today with not a deck profile. This time we got some news we're going to talk about. So, Digimon Card Game Festival is going to be happening soon. It's going to be a set of tournaments, right? Move this mic real quick. It's going to be a set of tournaments that are going to happen, these are the dates. There's a whole page about it. We'll put a link down in the description below for these tournaments if you guys want to sign up. But the interesting part that is happening is this. So, at these tournaments, there will be a mulligan and there will be a side deck. So the theory is that Bandai is using these tournaments as like a small testing ground to see how the player base likes this new set of rules. And I personally have some thoughts. We'll go over these rules real quick and before we get into my thoughts on them. But for the mulligan, it says players place their security first and then draw their hand, like normal. But to mulligan, you place all of your hand or all the cards in your hand at the bottom of your deck. You don't shuffle, you don't replace the security, and then you just get 5 new cards. You cannot mulligan more than once. So, I personally do not think a mulligan should be implemented in the Digimon card game. I've never thought a mulligan should be implemented in the card game. And decks that are more gimmicky and less consistent will become more normalized if we do get a mulligan. However, the way that they're introducing this mulligan, it seems a lot better than some other card games, or like in Vanguard, or like even Pokemon. So, I don't like broken mulligans where you could just get to mulligan for free. This is once, you don't get to choose which cards go back. Like, you have to send your whole hand. So that's a little bit better. But yeah, that's the mulligan rule. And I think some decks will be impacted by it quite a bit. Realistically, a mulligan might not make the game any better or worse, but the format will definitely change because they are implementing this. You will see a different set of decks doing better at a tournament like this than expected, or than like a normal tournament, just because less consistent decks will be rewarded because now they have a mulligan. So let's take an example, right? Like, we have Gabu Bond. Gabu Bond is not a flexible deck. It doesn't have a lot of variety in its plays, and that's a weakness the deck has. But its strength is its raw power and its incredible consistency. And you compare that to something like Jessamon. Jessamon has a lot of power, very high ceiling, but its weakness is its consistency. Now you're making this matchup that was, a matchup that you would see a lot in BT6 in the EX format, and now you're skewing it in Jessamon's favor with these set of rules. It's not, I don't know if it's any better or worse, but it is a different game, because the Jessamon deck can mitigate its lack of consistency with a mulligan. So, I don't want a mulligan to be implemented in this game that I've grown used to, but I am interested to see what this does for the game. I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm not going to be closed-minded going into this, but when asked my opinion, I've always said that the game should not have one, and if we have one, then it kind of becomes a little bit different of a game, in the sense of what decks do and don't do well. So, moving on to the sideboard. Players can bring a 10-card side deck. Side deck can include cards that you would swap out with your main deck and for your Digi-Eggs. So, the one thing is with a side deck and a main deck, you always have to have the same number of cards in between games. Like, I can't add extra cards to my deck in between games like 1 and 2, right? Like, if I have 10 cards in my side deck going into game 2, whenever we start game 2, there has to still be 10 cards in my side deck. So if I if I play one Digi-Egg in my main deck, but I have extra Digi-Eggs in my side deck, I don't know if you will be able to just put 4 more Digi-Eggs in your deck and just go forward with a 6-card sideboard going into game 2, and now a 5-card Digi-Egg deck. So I think if you're going to side Digi-Eggs, you still need to play 5, or I don't know. It's going to be weird with eggs. But you are apparently allowed to side them. So there's that. The limit of copies remains the same. So, like, you can't play 5 copies of a card in a deck between your main deck and side deck. Or, subsequently, you can't play 51 copies of Eosmon between your deck and your side deck, which is kind of funny. So, no more of the days that you can have 100% of the cards you play be Eosmon. Contents of sideboard or a secret area. Yep. And then the other big one here was let's see. Players are not permitted to review their side deck contents during a game. So in between, or like in the middle of a match, I cannot look at my side deck and remind myself what is and is not there anymore. And in other games you were allowed to, but it did create situations where some players would take that as an opportunity to cheat in their favor. So Bandai is just trying to mitigate that here, and I do understand why the rule has been implemented. But yeah, I personally am in favor of sideboards in pretty much every card game, but that is mostly because of my own personal bias. I do not really think a sideboard is going to be good for Digimon either, especially a 10-card sideboard. I think if this game were to have a sideboard, you could have 5 cards maximum, and it would be okay. But even then, that's kind of pushing it. This deck, the game has a lot of draw power. It has a lot of flexibility with deck building, and I don't really feel like this is a game that needs a sideboard to create a balanced metagame. The metagame already balanced itself out. We have proven this. And side decks might detract from that, but only time will tell. But 10 cards is a monstrous amount. Like, players are debating if we should have one at all. But imagine being able to change 20% of your deck in between games 1 and 2. And all of the good players pretty much will. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, when I played competitively there, pretty much every single game I went into at a regional, I would be swapping at least 11 or 12 cards from my side deck into my main deck out of 15. And that was in a varied format, you know. Every single match I'd be able to do that. And that's because, you know, I was able to build my side deck well, but also because there was a lot of overlap in between the cards that you'd want between matchup X and matchup Y. And in Digimon, there are going to be a lot of those same things, like Madoki Betamon or Terriermon are going to be good into blue and purple. So, like, you do have a lot of overlap with cards like that. You know, if you want to side in more removal, that's going to be really good against any tower deck, basically. Or any deck that tries to, like, ramp up and digivolve super wide, or super big. So 10 cards is an absolute, just massive amount to be playing. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but again, we'll see what this does for the format. The other point I want to bring up with this is that it does take time to swap cards from your main deck and your side deck, right? So in between games, you're going to be spending extra time doing this. And in a format where we already have a deck, Security Control, that wants to bring your opponent to time and force draws that way, or win the game that way, this kind of scares me. I really feel like the addition of sideboards will benefit Security Control a lot, just because they'll be able to play to that win condition a little bit more by spending an extra minute or two between all of their games. And it won't be any fault to the player. It's not like they're playing scummy or doing anything wrong. If I was playing security control at a big tournament, I'd probably be doing the exact same thing. Just take a little bit extra time, side your cards, and play to that time condition pretty well. Win conditions are win conditions, you know? And that's, if we're gonna have a 10-card sideboard, I think we should increase the amount of time in the rounds, specifically for this tournament, right? This is the only... these tournaments are the only place where these rules are taking effect, and I hope that at this, like, testing ground that Bandai is doing, they see that 10 cards is a lot, and that they're going to have a lot of games that go to time, and either they're going to increase the amount of time allotted in a round, or decrease the amount of cards they allow in a sideboard. And I think either of those solutions would be fine. But, yeah, my thoughts on this, we're getting a mulligan. I do not want a mulligan. We're getting a side deck. It is a massive side deck, and it makes me nervous. So that's my thoughts on the new rules. Let's go ahead and go into what decks benefit and what decks don't benefit from the addition of a mulligan. So on screen right here, I have some cards that are representative of some pretty consistent decks within the BT6 and the EX1 format. You know, Lord Nightmon is a pretty consistent deck, has a bunch of good tops. It's basically Jessamon, but less powerful, but more consistent. We have pretty much every iteration of Black. It's a pretty consistent deck. It's usually not going to, like, win big events, but you can, like, the deck will do the same thing pretty much every time, so I'd call that consistent. We have Agubond, and then we have Security Control here, right? If you implement a mulligan into this game, these decks suffer, just because their strength already was their consistency. If you make other decks more consistent, then there's not as much of a reason to play any of these, right? And going into this, this other slide that I have here has a bunch of cards that are representative of some decks that are considered to be less consistent, you know? Like Jessamon. Nobody is going to call Jessamon the most consistent deck in the format. But everybody's going to say Jessamon has the most power. So typically, if Jessamon is going to play tech cards, it's going to try to up its consistency. It's going to try to play cards that'll let it find more saviors, let it find more sisters, let it find more copies of its level 6. And with a mulligan, you can do exactly that without changing your list at all. Shine Greymon, for those of you that played in the 1.5 format, was a very, very powerful deck back then. But its problem was you had to fit in like 11 tamers into the list. And that hurt its consistency back in the day a lot. Because you'd cut from your rookies, you'd cut from your champions, and you'd just open more bricks. If we had a mulligan, that deck would be even more broken than it was. And I mean, Shine Greymon's going to get a massive buff with all these hybrid supports, so the fact that it's getting a big buff now, you know, maybe you should pick up some Shine Greymons. And then, yeah, moving on right along, we got this Lilith here. Lilith Loop is by no means a consistent deck, but it's a very, very strong and it's a very, very combo-oriented deck. If you give Lilith the chance to, like, let's say you open some cards that you definitely want to keep in your deck for late game, and you know that you're going to draw your entire deck, you can just bottom deck those cards, make sure that you see them in your late game, and that you open a couple less bricks. Gallantmon, decks like Gallantmon and decks like Ulforce Veedramon never really got a chance to even take off in the format because they weren't very consistent for, like, they had a relative lack of power and a relative lack of consistency, so nobody really even tried to play them. But now, with a mulligan, these decks become super consistent because you are always going to find the tamers that you need, the level 3 that you need, whatever combo pieces you're trying to play. And, yeah, basically the bottom line is this, on paper, it you can make the argument that it would even out the format, like the rogue decks become better and the best decks become a little bit less good so that everything is more on an even playing field. And to a non-veteran TCG player, I would understand why you would think that. But from experience, I can tell you that's probably not how it's going to go. What's going to end up happening is there's just going to be a different set of decks that are going to be the new tier 1, and there's going to be a different set of the decks that are the new rogue decks. Everything's going to be the same, just the names are going to change a little bit. And, yeah, get ready to see a lot of Jessamon. So, hope you all enjoyed this kind of thought spew ramble fest. But hope I brought you some relevant information. Next up, we're going to have the last deck profile for BT6, and I am probably going to make a couple videos teaching the community how to sideboard, because that was my greatest trait when I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Was my ability to sideboard. And so I feel like I can share that with all of you guys who may have not had as much experience in a game that allows that. So make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe so that way you can see those videos when they come out. And we will catch you all next time. Bye, everyone.